Good afternoon, Aradhana Lal. You're here with us from Lemon Tree Hotels, where you're the VP for Brand, Communications and Sustainability. What's exciting for me is that diversity is seen as part of sustainability in your hotel group. Before we discuss that though, I want to share my knowledge of your hotel, you or your hotel group. You applied in 2016. And I think it's fair to say that the whole panel was blown away by what you'd achieved in terms of the diversity of your staffing. Absolutely extraordinary. So much so that when I was actually booked into one of your hotels, the one at Delhi Airport, I arrived in a very nervous condition because I had very, very high expectations of what that experience would be like. So I arrived and a very charming young man came out and helped me with my bags. And it wasn't until there was an issue about which were my bags and which were somebody else's that I realized that this person was deaf. But I have to tell you, the service, that was one of the best ever check-ins I've had anywhere in the world. And it just demonstrates that with good management, you can actually offer a really good service. So I wanted to begin the interview by just saying thank you, not only for applying for the award, but also for fulfilling everything that I could have expected for the reasons that we gave you the award back in 2016. So it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you today. Do you want to just start maybe, Al, by telling us something about the Lemon Tree Group, where it came from, what it does?
Absolutely. Happy to be here today. Good afternoon, good evening. Lemon Tree is a company that's going to be 18 years old in September this year. We started in 2002. And the group today has 81 hotels in 39 destinations with more than 8,000 employees and more than 8,000 rooms actually. What's interesting is that we are spread throughout India, and we also started our journey outside India with Dubai and with Bhutan, these two countries. Otherwise, everything else is within India. These hotels are all in the mid-market category. So we've got Lemon Tree Premier, Lemon Tree Hotels, Red Fox Hotels. And about a year back, we acquired the Keys Hotels brand. So there's Keys Prima, Keys Select, and Keys Light. We launched our own brand outside the mid-market space in what is known as the upscale space, which is called Aurica. So there are a total of 7 brands that we have across the country. The work that we've been doing in inclusion, this started in 2007, so it's been about 13 years, and it was very early in the journey of the company. The company was just being formed, the brand was being formed and growing. The interesting part is it started as an idea of an experimentation. It was a what-if question, like what would happen if we hired people with disability? The answer that the HR head gave was, I don't know, I can try. So it literally started as a trial, which is what makes it very interesting, because he went in with an open mind, not knowing if it would be a success or it may turn out to be a failure. We had no idea. So that journey started pretty early, 13 years ago, and we worked with speech and hearing impaired colleagues at the first point. And we just took 2 people. It started very, very small. And the things that we learned very quickly was that when you take a person who's differently able, what you have to understand as a team member or as a manager or as a company even, is how best to communicate and how best to engage with that person, given whatever disability that person has. So if it's a speech and hearing impaired person, it stands to reason that we'll have to learn something called the sign language. And in India, it's called the Indian Sign Language. So our HR colleague learned very quickly that we must get this arranged, that people in the team should learn this language and they will not speak in the spoken word and they will use the Indian Sign Language. That really made us start on the path well, I think. Today, after 13 years, it's really fabulous. Every member of our employee team, every member, including our chairman and managing director, all know sign language. We speak English, we speak Hindi, and we know how to use sign language. It's really good. We may not be perfect at it, but we know the basics. The managers and team members who lead teams with people who are deaf, their knowledge of ISL is even higher and even better. And we deliberately make sure they are trained that way. So it works nicely. So that was the starting point of the journey. As we went across the years, maybe it was 2 years later when there would have been about 20 or 25 people who were deaf, located at about 5 of our hotels across 3 cities. So we already widened it across hotels and we widened it across cities, is when the whole initiative was evaluated properly. and it was understood that there are many things working for it. The first thing was that these are people who had not been given a chance before. That's the way it was in India. And when they got this chance, they were very keen, very eager, and they wanted to give their best. It was like they had to prove something to somebody. Second thing we observed was that if we train them appropriately, if we give them the inputs in a way that they can understand, what does that mean? We should do it in Indian Sign Language, we should use videos, we should use role plays, so that they really get down to the nitty-gritties of the task and they understand. So suppose they have a housekeeping role, or suppose they have a role in the back area in the kitchen, depending on the tasks. So that was the other thing we learned. A third very interesting thing emerged in that evaluation, that the engagement levels of the other team members, people who were without disability, those engagement levels also went up because they felt a sense of pride, a sense of satisfaction that I'm working with people who are different, who no one gave a chance to before. I can teach them, I can guide them, and many times I learn from them. This is how our team members feel. And we know this because when we participate in the Great Place to Work survey, we do this every year. In that survey, when these questions were asked of our team members, that why do you like to keep working in Lemon Tree Hotels, they gave two answers. One was about growth and quick career progress. And the second was about feeling proud and satisfied that they work in a company that is so inclusive. And that's when they said that I teach them, but I also learn from them. I think that kind of engagement, if a company can get, we are home, basically. I can say many more things, but I'll pause here so that I can have you ask me a question.
Thank you. To some extent, you've answered some of my other questions, but I'd like to just probe a bit, I guess. Who had the first idea? Because at one level, to a lot of senior management, this is going to seem crazy. It's hard enough running hotels. Why take on this extra burden?
The idea came from the person who founded the company, from our chairman and managing director. His name is Pathu Keswani. He was, in fact, looking at the whole business model, whether it had to do with the way the hotels were designed, whether it had to do with the services we offered a guest in a Lemon Tree hotel, whether it had to do with the way our menus were designed, what kind of food were we serving, did we have only one coffee shop or did we also have a bar, these kind of questions. So in this process, when he was looking at HR and saying, what can I do to make things different, interesting, what new things can I try? That's when he asked the question that what will happen if we hire people with disability.
So just to check, because I think what you just said is really interesting. He was looking at the whole hotel and asking himself what would make his hotels different and interesting.
Yes.
Which kind of predisposes you. If you start life with that kind of view, it's going to predispose you to go towards diversity, isn't it?
I think it's like a precursor. Yes, I know what you're saying. It is.
Yeah,
and diversity in many things. Diversity in design, diversity in people, diversity in just concepts and ideas, all kinds of diversity.
Because actually reflecting on that experience, I mean, I'm not saying this rudely, but I was actually a Red Fox property that I stayed in Delhi. And I've obviously stayed in loads of airport hotels over the years. But actually, it didn't even feel like an airport hotel. It felt like a proper city centre style hotel. It was a very different, and I have to say from a guest perspective, a much more relaxed and enjoyable environment, even though the aircrew were checking in, which is normally the kiss of death for that experience, because they do it so often, it's just for them a routine. But it did feel different, and I can't really say why, but it did feel very different. So I think his strategy worked. But the other critical part of this, it seems to me, is your HR person, who didn't suck their teeth and say, oh no, I don't think we can do that, but clearly had a can do, let's try, let's see what we can do attitude. Is that typical of the company? Does that go across departments in your company?
I would imagine. So I'm part of the founding team. I have been here for these 18 years, and my role initially was sales and marketing. And today it is marketing and sustainability. And I can absolutely tell you, whether it was my HR colleague, his name is Hari, or whether it is our operations head or our project and engineering head, or myself handling sales and marketing at that time, all of us had this, okay, what can we do? How do we define this? What makes us different? Why would a customer leave brand A, B, C, D, which he's used to staying at, and come and stay at this creature called Lemon Tree Hotels, which they had never heard of before. I'm talking about 18 years ago or 15 years ago. So yes, experimentation and innovation is in our blood. It doesn't mean that we won't have a check-in and a check-out. Of course we will. It doesn't mean we won't have room service. Of course we will. These are things that are very fundamental to a hotel business. But we will provide the service in a way that you're not going to forget it. So that was important to us.
So you've got, in a way, we've already addressed the thing I wanted to talk about next, about whether it makes business sense. And you've just demonstrated, I think, very briefly, but very adequately, why it does make business sense. And I'm almost embarrassed to ask you the question there, but I think I should. I mean, clearly you've talked a lot about the positives, about the positive benefit to the business, to employee morale and to reducing staff turnover, all these things which obviously matter to a business. But there must have been some negatives.
So what I'll do is I'll answer the question on negatives first, and I will come back for a moment to the business benefits after that.
Sure.
So talking about the challenges, let's look at it from that perspective. I think the first challenge was, how do you communicate and engage with somebody whose abilities are different? Because we decided to start out with deaf colleagues, that became the very real and physical difference. That if I speak to this person can't hear me, and this person cannot answer me. So there was a very quick challenge that what do? You have to learn Indian Sign Language. But later when we moved into physical disability, then we moved into low vision, then came acid survivors. Now in all these cases, while you may be able to speak to each other very easily, but there are other things that might hinder your engagement. So I'm not talking only about speaking and communicating. I'm talking about engagement. So how do you get the best out of somebody who has low vision? How do you work with someone who's on a wheelchair, but you want that person to be agile and to get certain interactions done with guests and so on? You have to design the whole process, what we call the standard operating procedure. You have to design it keeping in mind, if this person has disability type 1 or type 2 or type 3, how will they be engaging with guests and how will they perform their tasks? A real challenge came to us when we started adding the intellectual disability segment, which is Down syndrome, slow learner, mild MR, and what is called IDD, intellectual and developmental disability. We did this work, we started it about 6 years ago. I'm going to come back to that. And within a year of that, we started autism, which is another very challenging disability to work with, especially in the hotel business, because it is all about engagement and interaction with strangers. Because when you meet these guests, you don't know them. So we had to figure out, and the challenge was then, that what is the way for us to do what we call job mapping. I'll be talking a little more about job mapping later when we talk about the inclusion model. But to tell you simply, job mapping is where you look at a role. So suppose it's a guest service associate in the coffee shop. He's serving guests right there. He's bringing them food. He's taking their order. Or maybe there's a buffet in the coffee shop, so he's managing the buffet. These are the kind of tasks he does. So when you know what those 25 and 30 tasks are, then you examine those tasks versus the disability. So if your staff member is deaf, can he do all these 30 things? If your staff member has Down syndrome, can he do all these 30 things? These are the questions you ask. You don't ask these questions alone. You take the help of people who are subject matter experts. Now, these are people who work at NGOs, non-government organizations, or as you may call them, non-profit organizations. Yeah. And they are special educators. Another term used for them is job coaches. These are people who can come to the place of employment and they can support somebody with support needs and help us train them, help them get integrated into the system, and therefore the whole thing works in a productive manner. So the job mapping process is done by our HR colleagues, our learning and development colleagues, myself, the operations team, together with that partner. The special educators are very important to that process. So that challenge of how do you bring in someone with intellectual disability to perform so many tasks within a timely manner and to do it daily, it took that effort. So those were the kind of challenges: communicating, engaging, and getting them to learn what they need to do. These were the key things.
So the costs, so I want to just pursue this because the part of my purpose in doing this interview is to try and encourage other companies to do something similar. We need to just look at what the real costs are. So it sounds to me as though the costs are largely in terms of staff time and training effort and looking very carefully at your standard operating procedures to make sure that they can be done by people with different abilities, the differently abled.
Yes. So what I want to say about the standard operating procedures is, see, in the end, if the guest is coming to have breakfast in the coffee shop, the buffet must be set up and the buffet must be replenished. There will be some items that are live, like suppose it's breakfast, your omelette or whatever, or if you're having an Indian dish, then dosa. So these kinds of services and these facilities must not stop. So you will not develop the standard operating procedure and say simplify, 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 drop this,
No,
drop this. It doesn't make any sense, because this effort of inclusion, I just want to state this here before you move forward. This effort of inclusion is done as part of the business model. It is our HR practice or our HR mandate to do this today. It is not charity. It is not something on the side. What does this mean? It means the challenge to us is we must provide service to the guests the way we had defined the service. We are not going to revise that definition. We can revise the standard operating procedure, which allows you to give that service. So for instance, if you have to do some instructions in writing rather than leaving them verbal, if you have to give some kind of a diagram to a person and he can keep it in his pocket, if that helps him understand it better, if you have to give some photographs showing that task being done and that helps his memory or it aids his memory better, then that's what we'll do. But in the end, the buffet is the same, those fresh items that are coming out are the same, and nothing will change as far as the guest is concerned. How did we deliver it? That is our job, basically. So I just wanted to make that clear, that it's part of business model and it is our HR model. That's why it works. That's going back to business benefits, basically. So that's an important thought process there. But you know, when you come to the cost issue, we take all this training to be part of our learning and development cost in a very standard manner. If you ask us, what's your budget for the learning and development cost for people with disability? I have no answer, actually. The only thing I can tell you that yes, we spent so many thousands of rupees over the year or whatever to hire Indian Sign Language interpreters, because in their case, they are freelancers and they'll have to be paid. But in the case of the discussions and the dialogue with our partner NGOs, they have a common goal like us. They are already training the youth. They are doing that part, and they have a commercial model for that. Then they need that youth to get a job. So it's very important that they have an alliance with a partner like us. So those are strategic partnerships. We don't pay them anything. They don't pay us anything. So that really works nicely because you have a common goal.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to my experience. And as I left actually in the morning, I was on a very early flight and I left early. I suddenly realized that all along the very long corridor in this airport hotel, about every 75 meters, there's a little shelf with a pot of pencils and a pad. And I remember smiling to myself as I came by and thought, that's how you do it, isn't it? That's how you enable a guest to communicate with someone who is deaf, who won't have learnt the sign language. And actually, it's that simple.
It is. You just have to think of little solutions. It's like that. Some solutions might...
These things are not expensive, are they, as solutions? It kind of cost you much to put up all those small shelves, and actually they look quite charming as you walk down a otherwise very dull corridor. And no disrespect to your hotel, but it's an airport hotel. They are dull places, inevitably. Can we maybe talk first then about the consumer response to this? Is that a problem, or do most people respond in the way that I did? I went away with a really warm feeling about your hotel and thinking, I actually can't wait to get back to another one of these. And let's face it, I was staying in a Red Fox. I wasn't in one of your more upmarket hotels. You know, it's one of your basic hotels, but it was a charming experience.
Yeah, it's the economy brand. You must try Lemon Tree Hotel and Lemon Tree Premier. And when you get a chance in Udaipur, the new upscale brand called Aurika. So firstly, talking about consumers, I'm so happy to hear what you had to say today. I didn't know that you had that experience, and that's really wonderful. I want to say about consumers. For this, I need to go back a little bit into the culture in India.
No rush. You tell the story.
Yes. So when you look at India as a country and as a people, while our culture is very old and there's a huge history to it and there's so much mythology also in our country, today it is still a taboo for a person to have a disability. And family members look upon it as some sort of karma, maybe from a past life or something, depending on what their ideologies are.
Yes.
And they actually consider that maybe I'm being punished for something I did in my last life. So what does this mean? If you take a negative approach when a little baby is born with a disability, or maybe a child acquires a disability at the age of 1 or 2 or 3 years of age, then you're going to be firstly very protective about that person. And secondly, you may not want that person to go out into society. You may not want people to know and comment. So one of the big issues in the country is that people with disability don't get enough of a chance to get educated, to get trained, to get skilled. When will they come and work? I mean, I don't know. It's a very big question. So if that's the culture of the country, that means the consumers who come and stay with us, they also belong to the same culture eventually.
Sure.
But very, very interestingly, in all these years of this initiative, we have never experienced a highly negative response. What we have seen from a first-time guest is a bit of surprise. Sometimes the surprise is higher, sometimes the surprise is lower. But that surprise within half a minute to a minute turns into a positive response right there. I don't know what happens to that person. You said you got a warm feeling. I think that's what happens to them. And when they realize that this person is actually trying to do their best and he's a proper employee of the hotel and he's providing a service, so he's part of the bell desk or he's part of housekeeping or he's part of the coffee shop. And when you actually get the service, now obviously the job is of Lemon Tree Hotels to train them. If we just put them out there and they don't know how to do their task, they will be frustrated, their manager will be frustrated, and most certainly the guest will be frustrated. So we are a bit careful about how we train them and how much we put them in the front. They have front of the house jobs, but we support them a little bit by colleagues, by buddies, by partners. The other thing is the way we've designed our services, whether it's a coffee shop, a front desk, even in housekeeping, though in housekeeping you have to work separately on different floors, is that there are other team members around. So if we are all trained that if we ever see a deaf person or an autistic person or a Down syndrome person spending more than a minute or two is all right, spending more than that with the guest, we realize that there is some communication issue going on over there and there is a need for support. So any other team member or manager will jump in quickly, and we've also trained everyone to jump in very elegantly. It's not to say, oh, you don't know anything, move. It's not like that at all. It is like, okay, what's up? Can I help you with something? We may even ask the employee that, can I help you with something? Or you ask the guest, you can kind of do it parallelly. And it comes out very neatly. It doesn't look jarring or anything. So we are all trained to handle that situation so that at no point does the guest feel, oh dear, now how do I communicate what I want right now? So that's an important thing. Now coming to the service quality, what we have found is that yes, errors will happen, but then errors will happen with people who don't have disability also.
Absolutely.
The question is, yeah, indeed. The question is, when that error occurs, can you salvage it just before it occurs? So suppose the wrong dish has been brought out. Somebody wanted a pasta, you got him a rice dish, suppose. Now, can the manager or some other team member realize that, no, this is the wrong dish? And as the boy or girl is approaching the table, maybe he's able to stop him on the way. So then that's good. You already recovered it before it occurred. But then you have to explain the delay because the wrong dish came out, now you need the right dish and all of that. The second is the error occurs, it takes place. Then how quickly can the manager or the supervisor get there, apologize, and then say, may I sort this out for you? It works out. It actually works out. We've never received a complaint saying that because this person had a disability, he screwed up my entire service. No one has ever said it. They may give feedback that, maybe if you could just give him some more support or something like that, they'll say, which is human. Which is
positive feedback. It's not.
Yeah.
No, it is very striking. I mean, the old rule about service is absolutely right. Things will go wrong, and it's much more important about how you fix it than it is about the fact that something's gone wrong. It's the fixing of it that people remember. It's what they take away.
Recovery. In the hotel business, it's called recovery.
It is the recovery that matters most.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you about possibly the most, I mean, I don't know much about this field at all. I'm way out of my depth really, but you talked about employing some people who've been the victims of acid attack, which is a horrendous thing. And we had a brief period of it being quite common in the UK, although not as common as it is in India. I mean, it just seems to me to be incredible that you can actually enable those people to get back the dignity of work. I'm just blown away that is possible for you. Do you want to add anything to what you've said about working with that particular group? Because they obviously have some very particular and special problems, including the psychological damage of having been attacked in that way.
Absolutely. So you've hit upon the right point. The biggest and largest issue, which will remain for years and years, is the psychological damage. Because here's the fact. Acid attacks are done by people who are the closest to you.
Yes.
It's as scary as that. In most cases, it's got to do with a boyfriend or an ex-lover, or possibly even a husband, it depends. Sometimes it could be someone from the in-laws, it depends. Now here's another fact which I find really bad when I say it, but it's true. Earlier, these attacks were being done almost exclusively on women. Do you know now that they are also done on men? And do you know now they're also done on children? And what would the reason be? Yeah, what would the reason be? When I tell you the reason, you'll be even more shocked. The reason is often to do with revenge, family revenge. So instead of, can you imagine, instead of taking out the revenge on that adult with whom you have the anger and the fight and the argument, you bring a child in the middle. So anyway, but I'm grateful that that's a very low number actually. So coming back to the ladies who work with us who are acid survivors, the first is the psychological impact. So we have trained and sensitized. Now sensitization is another very important topic, and I'll touch upon it in the model again. It means just because our chairman and the leadership team understands why we should go for inclusion, doesn't mean 8,000 employees understand. So we have to spend time with them. We have to brief them. We have to sensitize them as to why are we doing it? What is each disability all about? How do you work with a deaf person? How do you work with an autistic person? If a person who's an acid survivor is part of your team, how must you engage with that person? So for instance, we are all trained not to ask, when did this happen? How did this happen? Why did this happen? Never, never, never. It's an absolute no. If that person becomes your friend and wants to tell you later that this is what happened to me, you are talking as friends. As a colleague, you're not asking anything of that person. Secondly, we have deliberately not assigned roles that are 100% front of the house. The reason is we may have understanding, we may train ourselves. How do we teach and train customers who may have walked into our doors the first time? And suppose there are children with those customers, how do we stop that person from reacting? We cannot stop them. So we feel that there would be more psychological damage on a daily basis. If I make such a person stand at the front desk, can you imagine the kind of responses they would get?
Couldn't possibly do that.
Yes, it's too difficult. So they are part of our housekeeping team. Their job is 75 to 80% back of the house. Little bit they will be on the floor and all that, but they can manage that much. There are some jobs that are people who handle the computer very well and they handle the phone very well. So they are part of our reservation team. That works out quite nicely. It's a private team, you're sitting in a private place and it works well. And that person is so good on the phone and they can make a good sale on the phone and all of that. Also, the guest will never even know that that person is an acid survivor. It's like that. So I think the psychological impact, keeping them in a task that allows them to work freely without feeling constrained and never asking them a silly question. I think it's just as basic as that.
Thank you. I wanted just to explore that a bit. Can we then turn to the employees? And I guess there's two questions there. There's one about the differently abled who you are employing, and there's one about the others. Yes, so we start with the differently abled. I mean, it's clear from what you said earlier that there's a big pool of talent there for you to employ. And I think if I remember rightly, you're up at about 20% of your staff across the hotels are now differently abled. Is that, if I remember that correctly?
20% is not differently able. We have defined our inclusion. I'd like to just tell you those terms right now.
Sure.
We've defined it as opportunity deprived Indians.
Right, okay, yes you did. It's absolutely right. It's my memory.
You can replace Indians with individuals also. So what is the meaning of opportunity deprived? There are two subsegments. One is employees with disability, whom we are talking about. Yeah. And the other is employees from economically and socially marginalized segments. Now this would include people below poverty line, people whose education has been left incomplete. So they haven't got till class 10 even. They are up to class 9 only. They are widows, abandoned women, divorcees, battered women, orphans, abandoned girls. And about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, we started hiring transgenders as well. So this whole segment is called economically and socially marginalized. And this one, together with employees with disability, is equal to about 18 to 20%, which is what we call ODI.
Let's not take away from that. That is still 1 in 5 of your employees. That is an extraordinary achievement in anybody's terms. This is not tokenism, is it? This is what happens when, right from the top of the company, you've got solid commitment to demonstrate that this can work.
Yes.
Now, my guess is that those employees stay with you, but I did want to ask, do any of them then in fact move on to employment elsewhere?
Yes, in fact, it happens. In the first 2 years, we had 100% retention, which we knew was unusual.
Yeah.
After we crossed 2 years, because there were hardly 20 people, when we crossed up to 100, and then we leapt from 100 to 250, and then when we moved from 250 to 500 and more, naturally, then attrition will start. It's human. Now, what kind of attrition takes place? There are roughly 3 reasons. One is that person wants to either go back to their hometown, which is not where you have a hotel. His family needs it, whatever.
Sure.
Or he wants to go for further education. So these are very personal reasons. So that number is a little small, but it happens. The second is the one that's the largest number, that they get another job. Because here now, in these 13 years of our journey, so many other hotel companies, restaurant chains, retail stores, banks, everyone has started doing this work, and that's really wonderful. We do a lot of best practice sharing with all these sectors. I'll tell you more about that. So these folks get better jobs by way of more remuneration. Sometimes it's 1,000 rupees more per month, 2,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees. And because many of them come from the lower income groups, even these amounts of numbers make a difference. So they move on for what is called better opportunity, which is usually financially. It's not growth that way, but it's just better money.
So what you're basically saying, just to take up that point, you're basically saying these people have become normal employees who will move on if they can get a better job. And you've enabled them to go back into the marketplace, and in a way to your disadvantage, because you have to train others, but they will leave and get better jobs if that's what they want to do.
When we
you should regard that as a real example of good business practice, you know.
It is, and we accept it. We say, yes, we know that every year X number of people are going to join us and Y number of people are going to leave us. It's all right, because we've had a chance to add value to their life. We've made them employable. They're on the job market. People are coming and seeking them out. I mean, nothing could be better than that. So it's all right. We know it takes our effort, but it's good. And just to give you a little aside, sometimes those who leave even return, by the way, for a job once again. Why? Not because they didn't like the other company, but because they say that company wasn't as geared up. So the rest of the team members, the systems were not as supportive as it was in Lemon Tree. So even if I have to get 1,000 rupees less per month, I'll be more happy being in Lemon Tree, and they come back. It's interesting. Not all, some of them come back.
Have you sorry, can I just ask, have you yet, and this may be a crazy question, but have you yet had somebody who left, went off and got experience somewhere else and came back to a more senior job with you? Because that's going to happen, isn't it?
I cannot think of a direct example, but there might be one or two. The reason I'm saying this is, when they're coming back, they come back rather quickly. It's not that they'll spend 3 years there. They'll spend 2-3 months there, and then they'll say, oh, no, I think Lemon is better. So
but I think it's going to happen, isn't it? Eventually, someone will come back into a more senior position, and then you'll have absolutely normalized their job prospects for them.
Right.
Through what you've
their
done.
job prospects, their career growth, everything will have been normalized. So in terms of those departures, the third departure would be, as we know, even amongst people without disability, there could be some dissatisfaction. Maybe the work is too intense, maybe the boss is too difficult, whatever. So there are some of those reasons also. We do exit interviews with all our employees, anyone who's leaving. So in the case of the deaf specifically, we call for an interpreter. Even though we all know the language, we don't know enough. The interpreter is very fluent, obviously. So we call for the interpreter and we take that person's help to understand the exit. So if we find that there are attitudinal issues amongst team members or amongst supervisors, we address them. So that topic called sensitization doesn't end on the first day. Sure. We have to keep sensitizing and re-sensitizing. Yes, I just wanted you to know that. Yeah.
Can we move on then to the other group of employees?
Yes.
The employees who, if you like, are normally abled. Are they what's their response to this? Do they regard it as a burden? How do they respond to it?
I'll answer that in two ways. First, I'll talk about the first 2-3 years of the initiative, and then I'll talk about now.
Sure.
So in the first 2-3 years of the initiative, yes, the supervisors, the managers, they were all a bit concerned. Nobody said an outright no, because they knew the chairman was leading the initiative. So they will never say no, but they would ask Hari, they would ask the training head, they would ask us that, listen, are these folks going to be able to perform tasks? The question was as basic as that. So then we would say, wait, just observe, understand, you'll get to know. Then they would say, how are we going to train them? We don't know how we'll train them. So we'd say, wait, hold on, we'll get that partner NGO to come. They'll help you. So the moment they started seeing solutions is when they said, yeah, 1 minute, this is achievable. So
Yes.
to convert them from a non-believer to a believer, I'm just talking about the first 2-3 years. It used to hardly take few days or weeks for that to happen. Today, the culture is so deep and so intense that no employee in Lemon Tree who's been around, let's say for 2 years or more, is ever going to have a doubt. He's going to say from the other way, he's going to say, tell HR, when are you bringing me more deaf people in my team? When are the Down syndrome people coming to my team? He will ask upfront, you know. Now the challenge today is slightly different. As we are growing, many times we don't have enough department heads or enough hotel general managers trained within the system. We believe in growing from within. So suppose suddenly we're adding 5 new hotels this year, we might have to go do recruitment externally for a person who might have, say, 7, 8, 9 years experience in the hotel industry, and he's coming in as a hotel manager of a 100-room hotel. Now, this gentleman or lady doesn't know anything about inclusion, doesn't understand this culture. So it's the job of the HR team, the L&D team, and myself to do some deeper, quicker, more intense sensitization with those new recruits who are leaders, because we'll have to bring them up to speed. So they need about 6 months or so to figure this whole thing out, and then they become just like the others. So that's how it works.
That's very helpful. I've one other question before we go on to what for me is a really big question: is it replicable?
Mm-hmm.
When we first looked at your application, we get a lot of applications from companies who tell us the wonderful things they're doing, and then we check it out on the website, and there's nothing there, and you begin to suspect that actually this has just been put together to persuade us that they're doing wonderful things and they're not doing it.
Right.
And I remember, because it was me that first looked at your company, and I can remember getting very worried as I went through the website. There's absolutely no way in which anybody could accuse you of using this for your marketing. It's there in great detail, but you don't have to persist to find it. You're not using it at all, are you, in your marketing?
Yes, no, we're not. No, we're not.
Why is that? Why not?
It's sitting embedded in the About Us section, and we'll have to really go in and creep into that section to find it. You're right. So it was never a marketing initiative. I didn't mention one thing in the business benefits. There are 3 lenses to the business benefits. One was the employee lens, we spoke about it. The second was the customer lens. Now here we spoke about how they react. But I want to say one more thing. The customers who don't know Lemon Tree, when they hear about this inclusion initiative, they are willing to come and try. This happens a lot. So if you look at this from the lens of the chief marketing officer of the company, trial takes place because this initiative pulls people towards the company, towards the brand. Then when the person comes and stays, he likes the service. Obviously, we have to make sure we do a good job and all that. Then he wants to come back again and again. So loyalty is being built. The third aspect of the consumer lens is that he goes and speaks to others. So they will go tell their friends, their family, their colleagues. They will go right on TripAdvisor or Bookings or Expedia, and they'll put their feedback with proper details about how a person with disability helped them and did something for them. Now that kind of reason is a very big reason eventually to do it. We didn't start with that reason, but it's a big reason to do it. So what I want to say is that it's so obvious that whether you look at it from an employee lens or a customer lens or just a nation building lens, if as a corporate citizen, you wish to contribute to the nation, then by hiring people with disability, you are representing a slice of society inside your organization. You are helping someone live with dignity. You are helping them become confident and eventually independent. You spoke about how we normalize them for employment. So these things will obviously help the country as a whole. So that completes the whole loop on the business benefits. Actually, I wanted to just add that there. And then we can talk
But
further.
let me just at the risk of provoking you, I feel the need to just prod you a bit on this.
Yes.
You slipped away very, very elegantly from my key question. Why don't you use it as part of your marketing?
Okay, so I want to say we actually made a slight change in that. Firstly, we didn't want to use it as part of marketing because it was not supposed to be a tool in that sense.
Sure.
It was supposed to be a way of thinking. It was supposed to be a building of culture. And for that, we don't need to tom-tom it anywhere. But in the last 5-6 years, when we realized that it has added so much value to the life of our employees, with disability, without disability, and it had begun to add value to our consumers as well, then we decided to use social media, not use it as a marketing line, but to use social media to share stories. We made it a storytelling process. So that's what we're doing on whether it's our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And only in February of this year, can you imagine, just before the pandemic, we made a short audiovisual, which is for 5 minutes. You've seen that audiovisual, which talks about the inclusion piece as well as the whole environment-friendly practices. We wanted to bring out the sustainability story finally. So if you call that to be marketing, then finally we're marketing. But it's a video on YouTube. That's what it is, basically.
I think one of the things which interests me about the sustainability story, we will come back to the main thread of our conversation, but one of the things that strikes me about sustainability is that very often people will, for the first time, encounter an LED reading light in their room, and they'll probably do that in a hotel. They'll go to the car hire and they'll find that they're driving an electric vehicle or a dual power vehicle. Many of their first experiences, or they'll come across the aerated shower head for the first time in a hotel. And I think we sometimes forget the power of that in the hotel sector, particularly, of actually enabling people to experience it before they invest it in their own homes. And there's a kind of dimension to this, it seems to me, with the disability thing. I mean, for all you know, somebody who runs a pencil manufacturing business somewhere in, I don't know, in Calcutta, has been to your hotel, seen that it's perfectly possible to employ people with different abilities, and have therefore chosen to go away and see if they can do it in their business. And I just think that that is one of the things that hotels, because you have people as guests for a period of time, it's a kind of opportunity to spread those sorts of good practices. I don't think it's your responsibility to do that, but it kind of comes naturally with what you do. I just think that's an interesting thing about hotels and what they represent.
It's happened. People have written to our chairman saying, I run so-and-so business, so-and-so industry. I have seen what you're doing here. I want to thank you for it. And I'm going to learn from your example and implement it. So they actually say it. Just to add to your point, we've been doing a lot of best practice sharing in these 13 years, but more specifically in the last 6-7 years, because a lot of companies, whether they are hotel companies, restaurant companies, retail chains, banks, entertainment companies, manufacturers, all kinds of people, have heard about us in different forums, and they've come forward and said, listen, can you tell us what you do and how do you do it? We want to see if we can replicate it in our organization. You wanted to ask that question about replication. And that's how we started sharing what we've been doing. We have them over for what is called a familiarization visit. They actually walk around the premises to see what are these people with different disabilities doing? How are they doing? What are the team members doing with them? How does the manager guide them? And they want to observe all of that. Based on that, we actually developed an inclusion model, which has a 7-step sort of process to it, which is a very broad model, which is what I thought we'll share today briefly. So it's very interesting how guests who stay with us and people outside also, thank you, that's the model, are wanting to know more. So if you look at this model, there are 7 steps in it really. And how it works is that no matter what industry you belong to, if you can walk your way through these 7 steps, doing the detailing exactly as you need for your industry. So what Lemon Tree does in a 3 or a 4-star hotel is very different from what a JW Marriott or a Taj or an Oberoi will do in a deluxe or a luxury hotel. It is very different from what a retail store chain is going to do in their retail stores. And most certainly it is different from what a bank might do. So if Barclays or ANZ or somebody wants to adopt these practices, they will not do what Lemon Tree does, but they can still follow this flow through of 7 pillars. It starts at the very top, which is about vision. If the vision comes from the leader of the company, which exactly is what happened in our case, and it gets cascaded to the leadership team, so about 25 or 30 of us in the corporate team, as well as the hotel managers in all our 80 hotels. So about 120 people who form the leadership team need to understand and share that vision. It's really important. The second aspect is to have a dedicated resource, which is myself and my HR colleague, because it takes a lot of work. You can't do this by doing it for an hour or two every day. It won't happen. You need to really dedicate yourself to it. Sensitization I spoke about earlier, that just because the leadership team believes in something, it doesn't mean that all 8,000 employees have imbibed that. It takes some briefing. It takes conducting of sensitization sessions, for which we need the help of our NGO partners and our special educator partners, and they come and help. So you're trying to tell them why we're doing it, and you're trying to teach them disability by disability, that if they had a team member who was deaf, or who was autistic, or who was on a wheelchair, how would you have to engage with that person so that things work smoothly? That's the idea. You're preparing the team. Job mapping also I referred to earlier. You take every role in the organization. You can compare each role to 5 or 6 different disabilities. And this is done by spending time on the shop floor and observing. So that special educator who works with, say, people with Down syndrome will have to come to our coffee shop and watch for the whole day. And they'll have to do this 3 or 4 times, looking at different times of the day, the busy times, the less busy times, to understand what is expected of a guest service associate. How does the team interplay with each other? If the team has deaf boys and girls and Down syndrome boys and girls, how will they work with each other? Can you imagine that? So it's a very interesting interplay. And therefore, that's how job mapping gets done. It's a very detailed process. The goal of job mapping is to say, role number 1 can be easily done by a deaf person or a person with Down syndrome. Role number 2 can be done by a deaf person, but it will be difficult for the Down syndrome person to do it because there's a certain intellectual capacity required, and so on and so forth. So you're looking for all the ticks in the process, and you're trying to find the ones that don't work, basically. And even those that work, it doesn't mean that person will perform all the 30 tasks that are part of that definition. There might be 3-4 tasks that we'll have to remove from the definition, the job definition, because that disability is coming in the way. The process of assigning a job is to make sure that the disability does not come in the way of doing the task. That's really quite important. So that's how it works. Then comes the partnership piece. I have referred to the NGOs already a number of times, and therefore it's important for us to build these partnerships across the company, because without that, it won't be possible for us to run something so complex and so detailed. The 6th pillar is about run traineeships and pilots. Monitor them, review them. Don't try to go whole hog just on the first day, because you need a bit of a learning journey. So we have shared this with every hotel company that came to us. There were a few banks, few IT companies, entertainment business, saying go at it slowly. Choose those 3 or 4 disabilities, hire 2 people, 5 people, 10 people, learn the whole thing. And if you don't want to hire outright, first run the traineeship and then hire after that when they complete the traineeship. And the 7th pillar, I think, is crucial. And I think that's the purpose of your even having this dialogue with me, that whichever organization goes for inclusion, you can't just leave it as a few pilots in the corner of the company. It must be scaled up across the company and across the national presence of the company. So like we are present in 80 hotels in India, we must do this work in 80 hotels. So that's the whole thing. That's how this whole model works.
It would be decent of me to explain why I did choose to do this interview. It was partly a sense of I had such a good experience in that Red Fox Hotel at Delhi Airport that I felt I wanted to pay back a bit for that.
Thank you.
And I still remember the young man who looked after me and was really quite amazing in the concern that he showed that I should both get the correct bags and that they would be there promptly in my room. And I had very little time to stay at your hotel. I came in late and I left early. It's interesting. I should never forget that employee. So I wanted, it's a bit of payback from me, I guess. But the more important reason, and the less indulgent one, is I just don't understand why more hotels don't do this. So for me, this is about the replication. And I'd like to thank you very much for giving so generously of your time this afternoon. For me this afternoon and for you this evening. Been very, very generous of you. And I wish Lemon Tree every success with this in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.